We are in the final days before a decisive portal opens. The gibbous moon in Aries brings a spiritual force that few know how to master. And if you've made it this far, it's not by accident. There is an intense energy building in the air. Fire impulses, accelerated emotions, desires screaming for space. But if you don't know how to channel this with presence and clarity, warning, you will get lost in the chaos that is coming. That's why I need to tell you everything. Today, more than ever, God is calling you to align your soul with your desires. It's not enough to just feel. Speaking head, you need to declare it, with courage and respect, because only then will the universe respond back to you. Dizzy if you are one of the chosen ones. If you're here because something inside you knows you're being prepared for something greater, then you need to hear this message until the end. In 2 days, the cosmic alignment changes, and those who are not conscious of their own impulses will act on impulse and regret it. You are being watched. Strange symptoms, emotions that feel out of control. These are signs that your soul is trying to tell you something. Stay until the end of this video. The final message will reveal how to transform this inner fire into a spiritual power of attraction, clarity, and leadership. You often feel things deeply, more deeply than you let on. That fire inside you, that passion to connect, to be truly seen, is real. But sometimes, before you even realize it, you're already reacting. Words come out sharper than intended. Expressions turn defensive. And the truth you really wanted to share? It gets buried beneath the noise of the moment. There's a part of you that just wants to be understood without needing to explain every little thing. You long for someone who gets you, who reads between the lines, who recognizes the tenderness behind your intensity. But when you feel misunderstood, your instinct is to protect yourself, to armor up, to speak fast, act faster, and only afterward realize you never truly said what mattered most. That's not weakness. That's habit. That's the body remembering old stories of not being heard. The heart bracing for another moment of feeling unseen. You've done it before, maybe without noticing. You've tried to connect, but ended up creating distance. Not because you don't care, but because that caring never had time to settle into words that feel safe and whole. Now, there's an opening. A different rhythm is being offered to you, one where presence replaces performance, where the breath comes before the reaction, where your emotions don't need to be managed, but met. And in that space, you're not just more grounded, you're more real. You show up not just with energy, but with clarity, not just with feeling, but with focus. You don't need to prove your passion. You just need to let it speak, slowly, fully, in its own time. Not everything has to be said in the first sentence. You're allowed to pause. You're allowed to be soft and strong at once. And when you lead with that kind of presence, love listens differently. Because now, you're not reacting, you're revealing. There's a rhythm you've been following for a long time. Quick to notice, quick to feel, and even quicker to respond. It's part of your brilliance, that alertness, that spark, that readiness to protect what matters to you. But sometimes, what served you in moments of survival starts getting in the way of intimacy. You react before you even know what you truly want to say, and suddenly, the moment is gone. The space to be heard, to connect, lost in a flash of tension you didn't really mean to create. People don't always realize how much you care, how much you're trying. They see the edge, but not the effort. They hear the volume, but miss the vulnerability underneath. What they can't see is the tug-of-war happening inside. The part of you that wants closeness battling the part that's afraid it won't be received. It's not that you're explosive. It's that you're expressive, and when the emotions rise fast, they want somewhere to land. But if you're always moving at the speed of defense, there's no room for depth, no breath, no pause to notice what your heart is actually asking for. You're being invited now into a new kind of response, one that doesn't deny your fire, but directs it. One where your energy becomes presence, not pressure. Because truthfully, you don't need to raise your voice to raise your impact. Your clarity already has volume. Your essence doesn't need to compete. It just needs space. When you choose to pause, even for a beat, something shifts. You're not silencing yourself. You're making room for the truth beneath the noise. You're letting your words come from intention, not reaction. And that's when people really start to listen. Because now, you're not just speaking. You're being felt. You've come a long way learning how to protect your heart. Somewhere along the path, you realized that strong reactions made people take you seriously, or at least made them back off. That fierceness wasn't random. It was a language you learned. A way to say, I'm here. I matter. Listen to me. And it worked. Until it didn't. Because now you're in spaces where you don't want to be right. You want to be received. You're not looking to win an argument. You're craving to be met in truth. And yet, the habit of reacting still shows up, fast and automatic. Even when your deeper self is whispering, wait, there's more here than this moment can hold. This is not about blame. It's about transformation. And that's what this moment is giving you. Not a test, but an invitation. To shift from reaction into revelation. To be the person who no longer lets emotion lead the conversation, but allows emotion to inform it. With wisdom, with grounding, with the kind of presence that can hold space for more than just your own point of view. You don't have to keep proving how deeply you feel. That's already obvious, even when you say nothing. What's new now is learning that your stillness can speak even louder. That the breath you take before you answer is part of the message. That love isn't something you fight for, it's something you stand in. You've been refining your fire. Not to dim it, never that, but to use it with intention. To let it warm rather than scorch. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming powerful in a new way, where your truth has gravity, and your words carry the calm strength of someone who knows they don't need to rush. Because what you're saying, and how you say it, already has impact. You've been holding it in for longer than you admit. That need, that longing, that unsaid truth sitting just behind your ribs. Maybe you've convinced yourself it's safer this way. That keeping the peace is more important than stirring the waters. That if you just wait long enough, someone else will say what you're aching to express. But silence has a cost. It builds walls in places that once felt open. It creates space between you and the people you love, not because the love is gone, but because the truth has nowhere to breathe. What begins as self-protection becomes isolation. And that quiet ache, it doesn't fade. It just burrows deeper, turning into stories you start to tell yourself about being too much or not enough. The courage to speak, clearly, kindly, unapologetically, is one of the rarest forms of intimacy. It's not about confrontation. It's about connection. It's about saying, this is what I feel. This is what I need. This is what I hope we can create together. And it takes heart to go there. It takes maturity. It takes choosing honesty even when your voice shakes. You're not being dramatic for wanting more. You're not selfish for needing to be heard. The desire to feel seen in your entirety, desires, disappointments, boundaries and all, is not too much. It's human, and it's holy. Every time you choose to say the thing you used to swallow, you give your relationships a chance to grow in truth. You stop managing people's comfort and start honoring your own clarity. It's not about forcing anything. It's about showing up fully, without the mask, without the filter, without waiting to be guessed. Some of the most beautiful turning points begin with one honest sentence. You don't have to say everything all at once, but you do have to stop pretending that silence is working. You've always been someone who feels more than you show. There's a whole world behind your eyes, thoughts unsaid, feelings neatly folded and stored in the spaces no one ever asks about. And with time, you've learned how to carry it all quietly, to hold your breath through moments that deserve your voice, to keep things smooth, even when something inside you is cracking open, softly but surely. But lately, the weight of what's unspoken has started to show up in other ways. Maybe it's the tightness in your chest, or the sudden exhaustion after holding back one too many truths. Maybe it's the way you smile with your lips, but not your eyes. The people around you might not notice, but you do. You feel the distance growing between your outer calm and your inner chaos, and it's not sustainable anymore. There's power in restraint, yes, but there's also power in release. In deciding that your emotional well-being is worth the risk of being misunderstood. In realizing that speaking from the heart isn't a disruption, it's a declaration. A quiet rebellion against the version of you that settled for being easy to be around rather than being fully alive. You don't owe anyone perfection. What you do owe yourself is honesty, especially when that honesty sets you free. Not because it guarantees the outcome you want, but because it clears the fog. Because when you speak what's real, even if your voice trembles, you stop betraying your own heart for the sake of harmony that isn't real. And here's what's quietly revolutionary. You can tell the truth with softness. You can hold space for your own desires without erasing someone else's. You can say, "This matters to me," and let that be enough. Because it is. And so are you. There's a moment, quiet, often unnoticed, when you feel your truth rise to the surface and choose to push it back down. You tell yourself it's not the right time, that you don't want to create tension, that maybe what you need doesn't matter that much after all. And just like that, you swallow another sentence that could have brought you closer to someone or closer to yourself. But what you've been avoiding isn't conflict. It's exposure. That rawness that comes when you let someone see what's really going on behind the practiced ease, the polite nods, the carefully timed, "I'm fine." You've learned to be composed, to be the one who understands, adapts, makes room. But how often have you given that same room to your own voice? What used to feel like a strength, your ability to hold back, to stay calm, is now starting to feel like a cage. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've outgrown the silence that once protected you. The version of you that stayed quiet to stay safe isn't the version that's meant to lead you forward. You're not here to be mysterious. You're here to be known, not in fragments, not in pieces people have to guess at, but in fullness, even if that fullness comes with edges, imperfections, desires that might not always align with what others expect. And yes, it might shift dynamics. Yes, it might change how someone sees you. But maybe that's the point. You're allowed to take up emotional space. You're allowed to say, "I don't want to hold this alone anymore." You're allowed to be a little louder, a little bolder, a little more you than you've been before. Because clarity isn't cruel, it's kind. And giving voice to what matters is not a risk to love. It's how real love begins. There's a fire in you that's never really gone out. Even when you try to tone it down, even when you play it cool, that intensity lives just beneath the surface, ready to rise, ready to take over. In love, it shows up as craving, wanting more, deeper connection, fuller presence, a kind of passion that doesn't just visit, but stays and consumes in the best way. And yet, when that fire isn't met with the same heat, it can quickly turn to frustration. Volume rises. Patience thins. What began as desire starts sounding like demand. But here's the truth most people miss about you. Your passion isn't about control. It's about truth. It's about wanting to feel something real. Something that burns clean, not chaotic. You're not asking for chaos. You're asking for depth. For emotional honesty. For something you can hold on to with both hands and know it's not going to vanish the moment you show up with your full self. You've been learning that intensity doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. That presence, real, grounded, awake presence, is just as magnetic as any spark. You don't need to shake the walls to feel seen. Sometimes, the most potent form of passion is stillness that says, "I'm here, and I mean this." You're beginning to understand the difference between being dramatic and being deeply expressive, between reacting from the wound and responding from wisdom. That shift is everything. Because now, instead of trying to prove how much you care, you're learning how to embody it. In your tone, in your touch, in the way you pause instead of pushing, in how you hold someone's gaze without needing to chase their approval. This isn't about muting your fire. It's about mastering it, about letting it guide rather than consume. Because love built on presence, not pressure, is the kind that lasts. And that's the kind you're finally ready to give and receive. There's a part of you that loves hard and fast, not because you're reckless, but because when something touches your soul, you want to feel it fully. You don't do half-hearted connections. You don't pretend when you care. But that same depth that makes you magnetic can also make you reactive. And somewhere along the way, intensity started to blur with volatility. It became easy to confuse feeling deeply with feeling loudly. You've likely been told before that you're too much, too passionate, too emotional, too intense. But what they didn't see is how much devotion lives beneath that flame. How your heart never learned how to love in measured doses. And yet, even you started to notice. There's a difference between being fully alive in your love and getting swept by it. This is your turning point, where you stop pouring your energy into moments that leave you ungrounded, where you stop performing passion and start channeling it into presence. Real connection doesn't need drama to feel electric. It needs honesty. It needs two people showing up without armor, without games, without the need to prove who feels more. You're beginning to see that emotional maturity isn't about being less intense. It's about becoming more conscious of how you direct that intensity. You still burn, but now your fire illuminates instead of scorches. You speak not to overpower, but to connect. You reach out not from fear of losing, but from a desire to build. And this version of you? It's powerful. It doesn't chase chaos. It chooses clarity. It doesn't collapse when not mirrored perfectly, because it's centered in its own truth. You're not here to tame your fire. You're here to refine it, to let it become something that warms, that heals, that draws others in, not to your storm, but to your stillness. You've always carried a certain heat in your presence, not just in how you move, but in how you feel. There's no middle ground with you. When you care, you really care. When you want, it shows. And in the past, that raw energy may have come out sideways, in bursts, in arguments, in misunderstood intensity that others couldn't hold. Not because you were wrong, but because you were never taught how to channel what you feel, only how to react to it. But now, you're starting to realize that love doesn't need to feel like a fire alarm. It can be steady, intentional, embodied. You're learning that you can be just as passionate in a whisper as in a declaration. That your presence alone, when fully grounded, speaks louder than any raised voice or emotional spike ever could. It's not about dimming your light. It's about choosing where and how it shines. That shift doesn't come from denial. It comes from evolution. You've seen what happens when emotions move faster than understanding. You've witnessed the rupture that can follow when truth isn't given the space to arrive in clarity. This season invites a different kind of power, the kind that doesn't rush to be seen, but knows it will be. The kind that no longer mistakes chaos for chemistry. You're not looking for intensity that burns out. You're building a kind of connection that holds, deepens, and expands over time. You've felt the difference, when your passion leads to conflict versus when it creates intimacy. And now, you're choosing the latter, not because you're afraid of being bold, but because you've discovered a new way to be fierce. One that isn't about domination, but devotion. One that says, I won't hide what I feel, but I'll meet you with intention, not explosion. That's the love you're learning to offer. And it's the kind that changes everything. You've lived through the weight of moments you wished you could rewind. Words you didn't mean, tones that landed too sharp, silences that stretched longer than they needed to. Not because you lacked love, but because in the heat of a feeling, reaction moved faster than reflection. And you're not alone. We've all, at some point, let the urgency of a moment drown out the deeper truth we were trying to express. But you've grown. You're no longer satisfied with apologizing after the storm. You want to stop the storm before it starts. You want to be someone who leads with presence, not pattern. And that's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware. Noticing the edges as they rise. Choosing not to bite back when you feel unseen. Letting a breath come before a sentence does. This doesn't mean abandoning passion. It means guiding it. It means realizing that your ability to feel deeply isn't a flaw. It's a power. And that power, when directed with clarity, can heal instead of harm. You're beginning to witness yourself in real time. Catching the moment your voice wants to spike and choosing calm instead of chaos. Not because you're suppressing, but because now you're choosing. That's what reintegration looks like. Not denying who you've been, but reclaiming who you're becoming. And each time you act from that new place, when you speak instead of snap, when you stay instead of shut down, you rewrite a pattern. You create safety where there used to be rupture. You begin to trust yourself in moments that once felt slippery and out of reach. And the more you do it, the more your relationships shift. Because people can feel when your energy is different, when your words come from intention, not impulse. That version of you, it's not just more grounded. It's magnetic. And it's already here, waiting for you to let it lead. There's a version of you that used to take over in certain moments, sharp-tongued, fast-moving, ready to defend before understanding could arrive. It was never about being unkind. It was about protection, about not letting someone get too close without earning it, about staying one step ahead of being hurt. That version of you wasn't wrong. It was just tired. Tired of having to be so alert, so quick, so hard. But lately, something's shifting. You're seeing how those reactions, while once necessary, are no longer aligned with the kind of connection you crave now. The conversations you want to have require more space. The love you want to feel asks for more softness. You can't keep living in the tension between wanting intimacy and bracing for impact. It's subtle, this shift, not loud or dramatic. But you're starting to catch yourself before the old script kicks in. You pause where you used to press. You ask a question instead of assuming. You stay present where you would have shut down. And that's everything. Because the truth is, it's not about changing who you are. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that were never given room to grow. The parts that speak with clarity instead of reactivity. The ones that don't need to raise their voice to be heard. The parts that know love is not won in battle, but built in presence. You've seen how a single reactive moment can undo hours of closeness. Now, you're learning how a single conscious moment can restore it. You're giving yourself permission to show up with more grace, not for anyone else's comfort, but for your own peace. And that peace is becoming your new default. Not because the fire is gone, but because you've finally stopped letting it burn everything down just to feel alive. This is what rebuilding looks like. Quiet, steady, and absolutely real. It used to happen so fast. A look, a tone, a shift in the air, and suddenly, you were in defense mode. Words left your mouth before you could shape them. The feeling of being misunderstood, dismissed, or cornered would rise, and with it came the reaction. And even when you were right, even when your feelings were valid, the aftermath always left something undone. An apology lingering, a connection slightly bruised, a part of you wondering, could that have gone differently? Now, you're not just noticing that pattern, you're interrupting it. And that alone is a quiet revolution. Because awareness is a doorway. It doesn't erase what's been said before, but it gives you the power to respond with presence rather than protection. You've started realizing that being heard isn't about volume. It's about timing, tone, and truth. And the more you access that awareness, the more you begin to trust yourself in moments where you once felt out of control. It's not about pretending you don't get triggered. It's about knowing what to do with that heat when it rises. About breathing before speaking. About letting the part of you that wants connection lead, not the part that's still holding old hurt. You're not suppressing emotion, you're shaping it into something that builds instead of breaks. And in doing so, you're creating a different kind of memory. One where someone remembers how you stayed, how you softened instead of snapped, how you stayed true to what you felt without weaponizing it. That's strength. That's presence. That's transformation. Each time you respond with intention, you lay a new foundation for love, for trust, for the kind of safety that lets a relationship deepen. You're not just unlearning reactions. You're embodying something wiser, something steadier, something that sounds like, this is who I am now, and this is how I love. You've spent so much time hoping that the people around you would just know, that they would sense what you needed, that they'd catch the nuance in your tone, the shift in your energy, the way you pull back just slightly when something feels off. You've wanted love to read between the lines, and when it didn't, it felt like rejection. Or worse, like proof that you asked for too much. But here's what you're learning. Desire doesn't make you needy, and clarity isn't confrontation. You've been conditioned to believe that asking directly might push love away, when in truth, it's what brings it closer. It invites alignment. It calls in people who are capable of meeting you where you are, not where they assume you should be. This new chapter isn't about waiting to be chosen. It's about choosing yourself enough to speak clearly, to say, this is how I love. This is what I long for. This is what opens me. It's about offering the full truth of who you are without apology, trusting that the right ones won't run, they'll rise. You're not declaring ultimatums. You're offering direction. You're not demanding. You're revealing. And when that truth is delivered with heart, with softness, with steadiness, with self-respect, it becomes a bridge, not a wall. It opens the door to real intimacy. Because love, when it's honest, becomes a conversation, not a guessing game. The fire in you isn't here to scare people off. It's here to illuminate the path. And when you let that fire be fueled by soul instead of fear, something beautiful happens. Your needs stop feeling like burdens and start becoming invitations. To grow, to listen, to love better. You're done hoping to be read. Now, you're ready to be heard. There's a shift happening within you, subtle but undeniable. You've stopped romanticizing the kind of love that requires you to be vague, silent, or endlessly patient. You no longer crave connections where you have to contort yourself to be understood. What you want now is different, a love that's awake, a love that listens, a love that's built on the courage to speak and the care to receive. It's becoming clear that you're not here to perform being easy. You're here to be real. And being real means naming what you feel, what you hope for, and what you're no longer willing to compromise. It means knowing that clarity is kindness, not just for others, but for yourself. Because when you speak your truth, You stop managing someone else's perception and start honoring your own integrity. There's nothing reckless about naming your desires. There's nothing threatening about expressing what you need to feel safe, open, and met. The kind of love you're cultivating now doesn't fear depth, it welcomes it. It doesn't require guessing games or emotional acrobatics. It thrives on grounded honesty, on presence, on the kind of communication that doesn't just come from the lips, but from the heart. You're remembering that you don't have to shrink to keep something alive. You don't have to be deciphered. You can be direct. And when you are, you create space for the kind of connection that breathes easier, loves cleaner, and grows stronger. This is your return to empowered expression, not from a place of control, but from embodiment. You're not just hoping for love anymore. You're shaping it, moment by moment, word by word, with intention, with warmth, with a voice that no longer waits to be invited, but walks in fully, carrying truth like a gift, not a threat. And the right heart will recognize it for exactly what it is, sacred, strong, and unmistakably yours.